All right. So we're really happy to have Tara Jebens-Singh, who's worked with us today. She's worked in public policy, wellness, education, equity, older adult, and mental health programs for 25 years and holds a master's in planning from the Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs. She's pursuing her doctorate in organizational development and change. She currently serves as the board of director in the Vadnais Heights Economic Development Corporation, the Suburban Ramsey Family Collaborative, and the Many Faces of White Bear Lake. And it's that through that connection with Many Faces that we were connected with her from Nick Voss. Her previous leadership roles include president and CEO of Northeast Youth and Family Services, adult programs coordinator at White Bear Lake Area Schools, president of the Consortium Lake Area Senior Services, board director of National Alliance on Mental Illness, Ramsey County, and Metro Meal on Wheels, and is a master facilitator for the Vital Aging Network. She was recently elected to serve as the Ramsey County Commissioner for District 1. Her term begins in January 2025. And she's joining us to kind of set the stage and lead some discussions around community engagement and outreach. So I am going to first make sure that she can share her screen. And welcome, Tara.
Hi, everybody. So my name's Tara Jebens-Singh, and really Nick had asked somebody from Many Faces to engage with you all around the issue of community engagement and before the election. So really I'm coming to you as a community member. And the idea was to have a conversation where we can share the work that we all do in this space. So really more of a facilitation amongst colleagues who are working to make sure that the work that we're doing is grounded within the community itself, that we are making sure that people with lived experience, those who are most impacted by issues and decisions, are partnered up with people with content expertise and decision makers, and the people who then implement programs and services and policies on the ground. So this is more just a way for us to frame and learn from each other. And I'm just excited to be in this space. One of the things, having had community-based and outward-facing roles, either as a volunteer or as an advocate or as a parent or even in professional roles, is the idea. I think any opportunity to get with people who are engaged in community work is always a wonderful opportunity. And I think it's really important to be able to be in space where we add to the collective pot before we try to take anything out of it. So the first time that you meet somebody shouldn't be asking them for something, right? It's the way, and this is a way for everybody on this call to collectively add to each other's learning and knowing and knowledge, so that then sometime in the future when there's a need for us to engage with each other, we've already have a grounding of building up each other before we ask for something. So that was that. Let me see if I can share some just basic slides. I always get a kick out of trying to make this work. All right. Tell me if you can see this. Yes. Okay.
Yes, looks great.
All right. Right. So what you're seeing here, this is a view from Pleasant Lake in North Oaks on a recent sunset walk. And you'll see a couple of pictures of this lake. It's near where I live. And I actually saw a Vlamo technician out on the lake this summer testing the water for invasive species and other things, and then really appreciative of all of the work that folks are doing to make sure that our waterways are safe and cared for. So again, my connection, I know Nick Voss from a number of years in the White Bear Lake area. He was part of a group called Partners for Good, which is a local group of nonprofit leaders in the Northeast Metro. We get together regularly for lunch and learn, similar to what you're doing here, to make sure that within our region we know how to support each other. And I also have been part of the Many Faces of White Bear Lake, which is a group. It started with Century College, the city of White Bear, the White Bear Lake area schools and the Matamita area schools to make sure that the greater community had opportunities to learn and engage with issues around equity and inclusion that were being taught and explored within the curriculum of the schools, and to allow the adults in the community to learn right along with them. We now have expanded in our 7 years to 30 local organizations, and with a mix of success in our community engagement goals. So like I said, I'm here as much to learn from you all as anything. When it comes to clean water, I'm an outdoor enthusiast, but I come from a health and human services background, from a policy background. So I have actually no technical expertise when it comes to the work that you all do. And so I come with that sense of hope that as we get into some of the conversations that I recognize that may be that sense of differential and in our sense of comfort with some of the topics that you all deal with. And I hope that you will be patient if there are things where I need to ask questions on. And also, I think it's important in these spaces to be aware of just the roles that we play and how that might impact the dynamic. So right now, I am an unemployed graduate student, but I am a commissioner-elect. So in the future, there will be times and spaces where I will have different roles that will impact and engage with in a different way than I do now. And I don't want to pretend that that's not true as we go through our discussion. All right, so you all know when you're doing your community engagement, some of the really basic stuff like stakeholder mapping. So when we engage with community, it could be to get feedback, it could be to get support, it could be for education, it could be for buy-in, it could be because we need partners in action like the Adopt a Drain program, all of those kinds of things. It could be because we need to have a garnering of support that then allows us to do the work that we do. It could be that we're getting funding. Any reason why you would be engaging with the community. It could be mandated by the role that you have, all of these things. So when we do basic stakeholder mapping, and this is pretty fundamental, usually you go, well, who's going to be influenced in the community? And that could be considering the different demographics of your community. It could be thinking regionally, who's connected geographically closest to whatever the topic or issue that you're bringing up. It could be the sector that people are in. Are they in the business sector, the faith community? They're part of education? Are they in the government work? Are they part of our technical field? Those kinds of things. And then along with that, the idea of our identified communities. So there could be neighborhood associations, there could be cultural communities, there could be other organizations that have some sense of allegiance to each other. It could be like a chamber of commerce or anything else that you'd be working with. And then there's also all sorts of other things that we'll be thinking about because of the particular issue at hand that may not be just cookie cutter template. And so, usually you sit around and say, who do we want to make sure we're hearing from and engaging with and learning from at the table, right? So that's kind of the basic thing. One of the things that I think is important when we do that is thinking about the specific goal of that decision or that activity. I was at a recent, I believe it was a strategic planning session, or like a mapping of a comprehensive plan for VLAMO. It was a public meeting that was reviewing. They had done a broad community survey. They had done some surveys or engagement with their technical partners. And then they had also engaged key decision makers and had those mapped out. And then we were engaging and discussing with those results. That was a very specific and intended and mindful way of engaging around a particular topic. But if you had a different kind of topic, you might do that in a community forum. You might do that in a series of educational opportunities. And this is the work that you guys do all of the time. All right, one of the things that I think is really important is that we also think of the roles that we're playing, and that the facilitators or the initiators of this community engagement are doing, and then also of the participants. And when I say that, here is a list of some of the roles that I have played over my adult life. And any one of these could be a different way that I would identify with a particular issue at hand. It would be a different way that I would identify with the facilitation, with the other people who I'm thinking about when I'm participating in whatever it is you're asking. So for instance, if I were to get a questionnaire when my children were still in school from that particular school community, I most likely would be participating and engaging in a way that had to do with me being a parent of a child in that school district and thinking about the other children and the parents in that district. But if that same questionnaire came to me in my role when I was leading Northeast Youth and Family Services, and then I'm thinking about the mental health needs of the greater community, not specifically of my child's learning experience in their particular classroom, but of several school districts throughout the region, I probably would answer and engage in that situation a little differently. So I think it's important for us when we're doing community engagement to ask ourselves, how are we asking people to show up? How do they receive us when we show up? In what capacity? And that can be confusing when we think about living in a community where we all live and work and play, raise our kids, recreate, advocate, protest, vote, work, in the same spaces. So I think that's that's another kind of piece of the puzzle to be thinking of. So thinking about how your different roles that you play in community and how that might shape your engagement when you're doing this work, but also how other people, the dynamics between people, which leads to that idea here of just how we show up. So we think about our relationships to the issues, the decisions, or the impact. And this is a circle of people who are meeting around issues this summer. And even in this space, we're sitting in a circle. There are elected officials, there are community members, there are advocates, there are people who within this social circle have different power dynamics, interpersonally or organizationally or systemically. Some of the people here have a very clear sense of their agency when they're discussing things. Some feel very alienated. Perhaps they have participated in these kinds of conversations before, dedicated their time and energy and their passion towards an issue only to be completely disregarded or unheard, or worse, exploited or extracted from, and have outcomes not be what they hoped for. It could be that they have been invited to come into a space and then all of a sudden realize that they're the only person who knows very little about what actually is going to be talked about and feel kind of that sense. Or perhaps they come and they're like, I'm a content expert on this. I'm a professor of this topic. And here we're doing some ABC work with general community members. And I feel like there's a disproportionate place of where I expected to contribute versus what's actually happening in the room. So it can happen on either end. And then it could be people who maybe have all sorts of power and knowledge and confidence and social capital, but they are not the people who are going to be most affected by what's going on in this issue. And so how do we make sure to center the experiences of people who are going to be most impacted by whatever issue we're talking about? Another area that we have to think about when we're having kind of engagement is in your discussion, the field around the watershed and different issues around that, realizing that many of these same players and participants are also being asked or engaging in, say, educational spaces and raising and how kids are being cared for in our school systems, or healthcare issues, or it could be the idea around economic development or other broader environmental issues. It could be any sense of, criminal justice issues that are overlaying. So there's a lot of static that's going on. It could be that the way that these ecosystems interact are complementary or competing. But we have to be aware that there are these forever ongoing connections between people and systems and topics and issues. And then the other kind of concept that we have when we're doing public engagement is the idea of there's just a greater context of what's going on in the world. There's an event that I was trying to go to the other one day, and the Vikings were playing on the same day, and also the election was going on, and it happened to be the most beautiful, like last weekend sunny day ever. Now those are things that we just can't really always look out for, but it's good to pay attention to, thinking that we could spend a year trying to invite people to a particular engagement and then realize that there's just other things that we have to take into account to get their attention and their full engagement. And then I think what we often think about too is the container that we create when we're asking people to engage with us. And whether that engagement is an online survey or an in-person meeting, is the engagement one, like in that upper right corner where we want you to listen. We're hoping that, we've got a person who is an expert and they are going to present some information and you are to receive it. Is it more we want to have a circle of people who are on equal footing discussing the issue, like in the lower left hand? Or is it where we're asking folks to give feedback and engagement in like we have in that down corner? So what kind of containers are we creating for this engagement? Who's being invited? How are they being invited? Based on what relationships we've built in the past? Who's hosting? What kind of space and creation are we making for what we're doing? Who's doing the facilitation and how are we pacing that? And then what's the follow-up? What do we owe back to the people who participated in this, and how are we making sure they know that their participation was valuable and useful to the greater issue that's being discussed? So I'm going to stop this share just for a second. When we met to talk about how to set this up, it really was an idea of how do we set up some different lenses for us to think about our engagement work, and then how can we react and learn from that. Before we go into breakout sessions, I just wanted to open this up to the greater group here. This is where I'm just now, one of many folks in the room, to say those are just some of the different lenses from which we can think about community engagement, but there are many others. So if anybody has any thoughts on any of the potential ways for us to look at and consider with community engagement that I threw out there, and if anybody has any others that we should be considering as we go through, I'm sure there's any number of ways that we could be looking at this. This was really just a way to start the conversation. I'm curious, when Ann and I were talking at the earlier about this presentation, it sounded as if many of you engage in community engagement work as a fundamental part of what you do, whether that's public education, whether that's trying to get people to volunteer and activate. Curious, your thoughts on just the topic of making sure we're not doing this work in silos or alone in our offices.
Hi, I'm Jessica with Dragon's Wind. And one of the pieces that I really enjoy about this is that I attended a conference, the Symposium of Urban Stream Ecology. I've attended a handful of their meetings. They're not annual. And one of them, hosted in Austin, Texas, basically gave us a bunch of problems to solve as land managers, as watershed districts, as engineers. And the whole point, they're like, what would you do with this? Was to say, we wouldn't do anything until we got the community input. What would you do here? We wouldn't do anything until we got community input. And it was ad nauseum. That was the whole point of the conference, with guest speakers and things. But I'm pleased that I think Minneapolis, or this set of folks, not just in Minnesota, but that we understand how important that is. So thank you all for doing work like that. And there's my 2 cents.
So the question I have as we get going is, so I will say, one of the reasons why Nick had, I think, had asked for us at Many Faces to kind of come to this was, again, not because we had any particular um, uh, unifying success, but in the effort, right? And so I'm just curious. I know I see a number of different organizations here. And thank you, Jessica, for highlighting that this is a group of professionals who understands the importance of this, and it is part of their work. Just curious, as we go into breakout sessions, we do have some, what we're going to do is go into some smaller rooms. I can see that, kind of shouting out to a larger group can be really tough. And it's maybe the first thing in the morning, maybe you're still getting your cup of coffee. But I think Anna's gonna help us break into some smaller groups. And then we just have some really basic questions so that we can start to reflect on some of these possible ways of looking at how we can do this work and learn from each other. So our first, I'm gonna show you this slide again. That is my intention. We'll see if it goes. There we go. And this is just the 4 really basic questions. And I want you to know ahead of time, just because this will give you a sense of the real basics that we're talking about. One is just a chance to reflect on your own work and community engagement, some of the challenges that we face, some of the lessons learned along the way. And then Anne had hoped that perhaps there would be some future exploration, meaning topics that maybe you all, as you meet in future meetings, may want to parse out particular things going forward. It could be, how to set together, how to use social media properly. It could be how to create safe spaces for disengaged community members, whatever it is that comes out of this conversation. So the idea that if we don't have the knowledge in the room, that perhaps there is a chance for inviting somebody who does have that expertise into the space in the future. So Anne, I'm not sure how you wanted to break us into smaller spaces. Oh, Kristen.
Yeah, Tara, I want to give a little bit of a response here. One thing that really sparked my thoughts, and maybe this is something to take into the breakout rooms with us, is looking at ourselves as a created space. And, we do a lot of community engagement with others and inviting others, but looking at ourselves as within a container that we've created and preparing ourselves for going out and doing that work and sharing those resources and sharing that knowledge in the room. I like what you said about bringing people with lived experience together with people with that expertise or the tools or the toolkits, and not taking anything out of the container until you've built that relationship within. And I think looking at ourselves that way and seeing what we're all bringing to the table and how we can share that better and step up a little bit more for each other and support each other in this work is a great thing to talk about. So thank you for that thought.